You are listening to part 29 of our series, 7 Medicines, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. It's good to be with you yet again. I was really excited to see when we last talked how much I have to say about stimulating and sedating and the different herbs that do that as well. And especially as an herbalist, when I'm talking about the 7 medicines, sometimes I wonder if people wonder if I'm ever going to get to the herbal part of it. And it's really here that I really do get into the herbal part of it. And also, during this past week, I was also really thinking about what to me is one of the real delights of life. And that is the ability to make fine distinctions between things, Yeah, we can say it's red wine and it's white wine, but when we know even a little bit more than that, it becomes more interesting. And when we know a lot more than that, it becomes really fascinating. But I do want to acknowledge that out there in the broad world, it's probably going to be red wine and white wine, and that people are not necessarily going to be so accurate when they are speaking as I'm being. So I'm talking about nourishing and what nourishing is. And I'm talking about how that's the same as and different from tonifying and how we can tell them apart. And I'm talking about stimulation and how stimulation is different from and the same as tonification and how we can tell them apart. And I'm also saying that stimulating and sedating are two sides of the same coin, one and the same thing. And that when we are wanting to stimulate or wanting to sedate, that we always need to be aware of that other side, that other possibility that we have. And one of the reasons that I really like this is because this is where herbal medicine, to me, really shows its rainbow. I know if I walk into a drugstore and want something to, say, help me sleep, that there would be some things I might be able to buy, and if I went to a doctor, there would be some things I would be able to be prescribed. But I would not have the variety or be able to nuance that variety of drugs the way I can have a variety of herbs that will act to make me sleepy, and the specific nuances, the specific energies, the specific personalities of those herbs that we can actually draw on to work not just with what I think of drugs as a really blunt instrument, which kind of says, you need to go to sleep, we will hit you over the head and you will go to sleep. Whereas the herbs, it's more like, which one of us would be the one that could help you sleep? Which one of us, tells the funny story, sings the sweet song, hums just the right tone? What is it, all right, that we can offer you? And so this incredible palette as well, not just of the plants themselves, as our skill that we bring to bear here as herbalists. So yes, we need to know about the plants. But from my perspective, we don't want to do like they do in naturopathic school and go through several hundred herbs in 6 weeks, linking up this herb and this disease, this herb and this disease, because again, there we lose, to me, what's the greatness of herbal medicine is that it can be individuated. This is what modern medicine is working itself toward, individual medicine, and herbalists have always had this, have always had the ability to individuate for the person who's experiencing this problem and to match them up with a green ally, not just with something that will hit them over the head, but something that will truly soothe them and sing them a lullaby. And we're also remembering that this medicine is alternative medicine. So it's herbal medicine, but it's other kinds of medicine as well, because they stimulate and sedate. And it's one of the reasons why we're really like digging in a little bit here as we talk about stimulants and sedatives and really getting ourselves steeped into it, really letting ourselves sink down into an understanding of stimulating and sedating, so that as we talk about other forms of alternative medicine, about body work, about acupuncture, hydrotherapy, naturopathy, chiropractic, aromatherapy, as we really look into these other forms of alternative medicine, we will begin to see that linking thing, which is stimulants and sedatives, stimulating and sedating, increasing and decreasing, energizing and unenergizing. And this is what makes it not nourishing and tonifying. And again, I have heard people say things like, dandelion is a really great herb to stimulate the tonification of the liver. And then you're going to say, how do I figure that out in terms of what Susun told me? Again, what we're going to be looking at, just as we did if we were looking at the difference between something that really stimulated and something that was actually a tonic, was we're going to be looking at end results. And not just immediate end results, but end results over a time period. Because we remember that one of the hallmarks of stimulants and sedatives is they become habit-forming. They tend to lose effectiveness as they are taken. So the more habit-forming something would be, the more toward a drug it would be, and the less habit-forming it would be, the more toward lifestyle medicine it would be. All right. Let's look at the ways that we can take an herb and use it for medicine. We often bandy around things like, oh, mullein is good for the lungs. But that's not specific enough. As we know, the difference between herbal medicine and folklore is in the answers to 4 questions. What part of the plant? When do we harvest it? How do we prepare it? And how much do we use? All of those have bearing on how that plant is actually going to work. Probably one of the safest ways to use herbs as medicine is to use them as a tea. When we make a tea, we use a small amount of fresh or dried herb, and we brew it for a short amount of time. This small amount of herb and short brewing pretty much ensures that our tea doesn't have the kinds of poisons that could really harm us. Many teas, especially herbal teas, are made of plants that are aromatic. And aromatic plants, in general, contain volatile oils, and volatile oils are stimulants and sedatives. When we think also of tea, whether it be black tea or green tea, Camellia sinensis, again we see, oh, this is both a stimulant. We think of the caffeine in tea. The first time I had a cup of green tea, nobody cued me into the fact that it should be really brewed for a very brief period. And so in my fashion, I brewed it overnight and then drank it, and then I didn't sleep for 2 nights. So I definitely saw that green tea was a stimulant. But I also know when I read English novels that when people are upset, the thing that's always offered is a nice cup of tea to calm you down with some milk and sweetener in it. So a tea of herb is often going to be stimulating or sedating, but at the very mildest level. So we think of a cup of chamomile tea for a baby who's fussy or a baby who's teething. Dried chamomile has lost much of its original oil, and that brief steeping makes it just enough to actually have an effect on the nervous system. To make our water-based brew stronger, we would use more herb and brew it for a longer time. That would be an infusion. Nourishing herbal infusions are part of lifestyle medicine, and they are restricted to herbs that don't contain any poisons. In other words, herbs that don't stimulate or sedate. When we make infusions of herbs that do stimulate or sedate, then we have made something that comes closer to a drug in its action, and one of the ways that we can moderate that is by the dose that we use. So we might make a sage infusion using a full ounce of dried sage in a quart of boiling water and allowing that to steep for 4 hours. And that would be used then by the sip or the spoonful to help dry up perspiration or to dry up breast milk. So when we make it stronger, we take a smaller dose of it. A cup of sage tea would be the dose, especially if it had a little honey in it. For some people, it will work as well as the infusion, but for most people, the infusion, even at a lower dose, works better for drying things up, and that's primarily because that longer brewing has extracted from the herb more of the poisons. So it is going to be more medicinal, more drug-like in its effect upon the body, in its ability to stimulate or sedate. We can go yet another step further with a water-based preparation and make a decoction. When we make a decoction, we take an infusion and we gently reduce its volume by simmering. So we could take our sage infusion, a quart of sage infusion, and simmer it down over a very low heat until we have only a cup of sage decoction. And we could then sweeten that and use that as a cough syrup. The sage tea could be taken frequently to help resolve a cold, resolve a cough. You know, your own taste buds would limit how much sage tea you were willing to drink. The sage infusion we take by the sip or by the spoonful, but we could do that on a regular basis. If we needed to use it on an ongoing basis, that would even be fine, so long as it was only a sip or two a day. When we get to the sage decoction, especially if we turn it into syrup by adding honey or any other sweetener, then we use it in even smaller doses, like a half teaspoonful, and for a limited time period. So not only are we reducing the dose, but we're also reducing the frequency of the dose and the duration of the dose as we make it stronger and stronger. We can also, from our fresh sage, make a vinegar, a honey, a glycerin, an oil, and a tincture. Vinegars, honeys, glycerins, and oils are usually not good ways to extract the more poisonous parts of the plant. Vinegars, herbal vinegars, are actually considered part of lifestyle, as are herbal honeys, although they certainly can have some effect depending on what herb is in your herbal honey. But it would be pretty much on the level of a tea. So if we had sage honey, it would be on the level of sage tea, and we could have sage vinegar. And both of those would be used in a fairly small dose. So we would use a tablespoon of sage vinegar on our salad or our greens, or between a teaspoon and a tablespoon of our sage honey. Glycerin is a byproduct generally of soap making, although it can be produced in other ways. And glycerides are herbal products that are made in glycerin. The move to make glycerides seemed to arise from a mistaken belief that it was somehow bad to give babies or infants herbal tinctures because they had alcohol in them. To my mind, glycerin-based herbs are the very opposite of what we want to give children because they taste sweet. Glycerin is extremely sweet tasting. And I don't want children to think that medicine tastes sweet. If the medicine doesn't suit a child's taste, perhaps the child shouldn't be taking the medicine. Or we can see if we can find a different herb that the child will like the taste of. Again, I really trust the body and follow the body clues and have never believed that it was necessary to make people choke down medicines. Herbal oils are rarely used internally. They are almost always used externally, and they can be used in small or large amounts. And then coming to tinctures. And tinctures of fresh plants and tinctures of dried plants are both available. Generally, the dried plant tinctures are more dangerous in that they are able to get more of the more poisonous alkaloids out and less of the buffering agents found in all plants to make those poisonous constituents more easily tolerated or processed by our bodies. So when we make a fresh plant tincture, we have more constituents available to us in the finished tincture than we would if we used dried plants to make our tincture. It's one of the reasons why people use dried plants, because it's the way that herbal medicine has gone, is toward more and more drug-like things. Drugs, in fact, are a direct byproduct of looking to make our herbs stronger and stronger. So one way to make them stronger is to use a very high-proof alcohol. When I teach classes on fermentation, I mentioned that before people had distilled spirits, the way they got the alcohol-soluble constituents from plants was to make a wine of them. And so a wine, being low in alcohol, doesn't draw out a lot of the poisons from the plants, and so we take it by the glassful. Whereas when we make a tincture with 100 proof vodka, which is 50% alcohol, or high proof alcohol, which is usually about 99% alcohol, we are able to capture the poisons, the active constituents in the plant, and thus we use tinctures by the dropperful or even by the drop. Just a small amount. because now we've got something that is far more drug-like in its effect upon us. The herbal tinctures made in 100 proof vodka with fresh plants are within the realm of tinctures the least drug-like, but that's not to say that they don't work or that they are ineffective. It is hopefully to say that they are the least likely to cause side effects, the least likely to have unwanted repercussions, because we are keeping more of those constituents available to us. The last way we might take herbal remedies would be as a pill or a capsule, and that would be herbs that have been dried and powdered and then put into gelatin capsules or compressed, usually with a binding agent, into a tablet. It's my belief that when we take herbs in these ways that are so far away from eating the herbs or rolling in the herbs, that our bodies, for a variety of reasons, seem to seek out first the poisons in the plants and to bring these into circulation. So I often say that herbs in pills and capsules are the most dangerous way to get involved in herbal medicine. Too bad. It is the way that so many people are introduced to herbal medicine. And this is partly because they are moving from a drug paradigm where everything is in pills into a herbal paradigm where we find that we don't actually want to have a plant in a pill. It makes sense to have a drug in a pill because drugs taste bad. They are poison, and our body is always going to say, don't do this, don't do this. I was just talking about listening to the body. This is one of the reasons why we have to put drugs in pills, because our bodies would simply never let us take those drugs, most of them, because they really don't taste good at all. So, if I were to ask you to look at this list of sedative herbs and to tell me which is the strongest and which is the mildest, motherwort, chamomile, passion flower, skullcap, valerian, California poppy, poppy heads, and hops, you might be able to do that, but only if we held the other variables from changing. In other words, I would have to say these herbs as teas, or these herbs as tinctures. How would you rate them? And it would be quite interesting that we would see that we would actually have to change how the plants are in the rating, depending on whether or not we were making a tea or a tincture of them. I was quite astonished when I was first working with Julietta Berkeley-Levy to have her books, especially her books that talk about child rearing, come back into print through my publishing company, Ash Tree Publishing. And one of the things that really amazed me was that she advocated giving babies a tea made from poppy heads. And I said to her, you mean the seed heads of the poppies, like what you make opium from? And she said, yes. And I said, but, doesn't that? She said, no, because it's the green herb. And she said she just picks the green poppy heads when they still have that white sap in them, and she makes a tea of them, right? She's not boiling them. She's not decocting them. She's not making an infusion. She makes a tea of them. She throws a couple of poppy heads in a cup, pour some boiling water over it, takes the poppy heads out after a couple of minutes, and then when that cools, feeds that to the baby to calm the baby down. I was astonished because, of course, if we were to prepare those poppy heads, those very same green poppy heads, simply by making a tincture of it, then I wonder if we would be able to give a baby a small enough dose of that tincture. I would guess, I've never done it, that tincture would be quite sedative and quite strong. We can also run this right out. We could say, well, Susan, what if you took those green poppy heads and just collected the juice from it? Oh, well, we've started to make a drug now. We have started by extracting just one part of the plant, and that's the white sap. And then what we want to do is we want to concentrate that. And when we extract and concentrate that, we have what's called a crude drug, which is opium. And opium, as we know, is quite a sedative plant. We think about the people smoking opium who are lying down. And we can take that even further and truly make a drug by not just extracting and concentrating, but then purifying. And purifying this for the alkaloids in it, heroin, and its many drug cousins, which are in such widespread use as pain-relieving and sedative things. And this brings us to one other consideration that I haven't talked very much about. And we'll end this show with thinking about yet this other variable. And that is that we might say, oh, that this particular plant is sedative in this way. But at the same time that it's acting as a general sedative, it might be stimulating one organ or organ system. Again, remembering that plants aren't drugs. Drugs are extracted, concentrated, purified constituents, so there's just one molecule, one constituent there, and it's going to have a specific direction of action. Whereas the herbs and the crude drugs that we make from those herbs still contain hundreds of different constituents, which allow those plants to work. I sometimes see them like a kaleidoscope or a starburst, that when they go into my body, instead of being an arrow or a shower of arrows, all going in the same direction, that they burst open like a flower blossoming and touch in a 360 degree, in a completely global fashion, everything that's going on in my body, and reaching out to it so that we could begin to understand that a cup of poppy head tea is not a drug, but it's close to it. And that valerian would be the one that I would say is next least strong, but I would have to specify valerian root there, because I also use valerian flowers. Skullcap is certainly going to get my vote as the next best sedative. And I do use skullcap tincture, so I can use very small drops. And hops, then. I have seen the people fall asleep next to a cup of hops. I don't want to say that it's ineffective, but by putting marijuana tincture right at the middle, I hope to indicate that it might even have some tonifying effects, certainly we would put chamomile next, and then California poppy, and passion flower, and motherwort. So from the mildest to the strongest, motherwort, passion flower, California poppy, chamomile, marijuana tincture, hops, skullcap, valerian root, and poppy heads. The wonderful world of herbal medicine. I hope I haven't confused you, but have cleared the air here, Gemini. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm just really taking a lot of notes here.
Okay, well, I hope you can make sense of them when you get home. We'll talk about it next week, okay?
Sounds great, Susan. Thanks so much. This concludes part 29 of our series, The 7 Medicines, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.